Papyrus subtitles translating alien whale speech will never get old. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 2025 sci-fi action drama sequel, Avatar: Fire and Ash. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content, like reviews, rank lists, and recommendations. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and even some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Avatar: Fire and Ash stars Sam Worthington, Zoe Saldaña, and Stephen Lang, and was directed by James Cameron. Set immediately after the events of The Way of Water, Jake Sully must continue the fight for his family and the Na'vi against dangerous threats, new and old. Avatar is a franchise I have a very strange relationship with. I like the movies, but strangely, I often feel like I don't. I know that sounds weird, and it's hard to explain in a way that makes much sense, but I have a sneaking suspicion that there are other people out there who have the same difficult-to-describe feeling towards the franchise. When I watch the movies, I largely enjoy them, but it doesn't take very long for them to completely leave my mind. It's not that I can't remember the plot or the characters. That stuff all comes back to me when I think about the movies. But that's where my issue lies. I just never think about these films. Unless they're breaking some new box office record or there's some new piece of news about sequel development, they're just never a part of my consciousness for whatever reason. It's a weird phenomenon for me, and completely unlike my experience with any other franchise or movie. I enjoy the Avatar movies when I watch them, but then never have the urge to rewatch them. I never have any anticipation or excitement for the upcoming entries in the franchise. Instead, these movies just transiently pass through my mind before evaporating again for the time it takes them to release the next one. This third film in the franchise is a continuation of its predecessor, picking up not long after the conclusion of The Way of Water. These two movies were filmed simultaneously, and intended to tell one large overarching story between them. And Fire and Ash just dives right back in, with no recap or easing into the story. It assumes you're caught up, so if the story or characters from The Way of Water aren't fresh in your mind, you might find yourself feeling a little lost until you start to remember and get your bearings again. With this story continuation approach, there are a lot of familiar plot beats that pop up here, to the point where large chunks of this movie feel like they were directly lifted from The Way of Water or even the original movie. There's a little variation to the packaging, and some of the character focus is shifted, but it's largely a retread of what came before. Jake is still trying to protect his family and their ally Na'vi clans. Quaritch and the Sky People are still trying to capture Jake and colonize Pandora. It's the same basic conflicts over and over again. When you view The Way of Water and Fire and Ash as one big 6.5-hour long story, the familiar plot beats sort of work in a cyclical narrative sense, but when viewing them as separate movies, as they're presented to us, the thin repetitiousness of the story becomes more readily apparent. To be fair, the story of Avatar has always been one of its weak points. It's not bad, just very straightforward, derivative of many films that came before and falling into its own strange self-plagiarizing cycle. But what has always positively stood out in these movies? The same thing that continues to stand out to this day: the visual effects. I think it's safe to say we've already got our shoo-in winner for the visual effects Oscar this year. There doesn't seem to be a noticeably significant visual improvement over The Way of Water here, but I'm sure there were plenty of technological advancements that were implemented on the back end of things in the 3 years since that last film. But just like The Way of Water, this third movie is an absolutely stunning visual spectacle. Once again, it excels at character and creature design. Everything from the whale-like Tolkuns to the slight morphological variations from one Na'vi clan to the next. There's a lot to look at in this movie, and a very long time to do so, but I often found myself captivated by small details, like the unique pattern of bioluminescent freckles on each Na'vi's face, or the tiny nuances of their motion-captured expressions. Despite the fire and ash subtitle, this is still very much another water-centric Avatar film. We're treated to a quick foray into the Ash clan's charred, fiery habitat, but like The Way of Water, much of the story is set in and around the water. Water is notoriously difficult to animate, but like its predecessor, this movie still manages to pull it off with almost unbelievable photorealism. It's all truly impressive to watch, and goes a long way towards making you forget about the movie's shortcomings. I have to admit that I find myself a bit more torn on this movie than I did with either of its predecessors. The original Avatar introduced us to Pandora with its extensive world building, and The Way of Water followed up on that with even more expansion and the introduction of new clans and ecosystems, not to mention some big changes when it came to fighting the colonizing humans. As a continuation of that storyline, Fire and Ash obviously still has a lot to offer. Like I mentioned, the visual effects are still phenomenal, and there are a handful of new world-building elements, but there aren't as many awe-inspiring reveals or additions this time around. It's not just the plot beats, even the world of Pandora is starting to feel too familiar. By picking up where the previous film left off, there's the addition of an ever-present through line of grief here. As a result, the story manages to impart some decent emotion as the characters grapple with their guilt and decide upon the right course of action to move forward. It's emotionally investing, and the action is exciting, but the occasional lulls in this overlong epic reveal the cracks in its grandiosity. The simplistic thinness of the story, the overt repetition, the manipulative fake-outs or deus ex machina plot conveniences, the multitude of blatantly dangling loose ends. Avatar Fire and Ash is still a good movie. It's still enjoyable to watch and is made up of some really great pieces, but great pieces don't always make a great whole. And when this film is viewed as its own separate piece, away from its predecessor, that is something that becomes abundantly clear. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one is definitely the visual effects. Well, I'm sure this comes as absolutely no surprise. From the very start, the Avatar franchise has been a VFX powerhouse, creating and incorporating new advancements in motion capture technology. It's wild how this manages to look both photorealistic and obviously computer-generated at the same time. The character design of the Na'vi is just as fascinating as it's been in the past, especially with the introduction of yet another clan. But it's the flight, and especially the water effects, that continue to boggle the eyes and the mind. I think it's safe to say that we once again have a very obvious winner for the visual effects Oscar. The second pro is the emotion. As what's essentially a part 2 film, finishing up the storyline begun in Avatar: The Way of Water, this movie has to deal with the grief and loss put forward by the events of that predecessor. Characters are each dealing with these emotions in different ways. Some feel guilt or a sense of responsibility, others anger and hatred, and still others are pushing their emotions down and focusing on the task of preparing for the next attack. To be fair, the emotions of this film are pretty standard. There's nothing particularly special or noteworthy about the writing here. But the part that really works is the emotional response it instills in the audience. Despite the familiarity and emotionally manipulative fake-outs, you find yourself caring about the Sully family, about the allied Na'vi clans, and even the Tolkien. On the con side, the biggest issue is the story. I want to start off by saying I'm kind of conflicted about this con, because the story isn't bad. It's fairly engaging, it's emotionally evocative, but it just feels like it's treading water. I get that this is the second half of what is essentially designed to be viewed as a big 6.5-hour long movie, but even so, it's just too similar to The Way of Water, which itself suffered from rehashing too many story elements from the first film. Yes, there's a lot of plot here, but it boils down to the same old things. Jake taking on Colonel Quaritch with the help of the Na'vi, other creatures like the Tolkien assisting to fight against barbaric whaling practices, general conflict between Na'vi and the colonizing humans. It's the same thing, just in ever so slightly different packaging. Con number 2 is how bloated this movie is. This can be viewed as a bit of an offshoot of the first con since it's related to the story, but man is this a very bloated film. I know people like to complain about long movies, but I don't mind them as long as they're well done and serve a purpose. If that time is needed to tell the story and develop the characters properly, then by all means, take it. But if that time is going to be used to double and triple down on the same things, it's just not necessary. And that's exactly what this movie does, repeating not only rehashed plot beats from the previous films, but also from itself. Is this character an enemy or an ally? Or an enemy? Or, oh no, an ally again? How many times are these characters going to get captured and escape, or captured and released? How many times are other characters going to grapple with the same moral dilemma before coming to the same old conclusions? The pacing and excitement helped to conceal these issues a bit more this time, but this movie did not need to be nearly 3.5 hours long. You could probably cut almost an hour out of this and still achieve the same end result. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Avatar, Fire and Ash, or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies or anything else. I'm gonna give Avatar, Fire and Ash 3.5 out of 5 paws. Continuing the story set forth in Avatar: The Way of Water, this is another ambitious and epic sci-fi action drama in the world of Pandora. The superb visual effects continue to amaze, but the bloated and repetitious story retreads well-worn, overly familiar plot beats without adding much new value or world building. I would recommend Avatar: Fire and Ash to existing fans of the Avatar franchise or people interested in cutting-edge visual effects. This film is very similar to The Way of Water, essentially picking up where that film left off and then proceeding to retread many of the same story beats. So if you don't already like the Avatar movies, this probably isn't going to do much to change your mind. And if you do like them, I think responses are going to be mixed, and mostly dependent on your tolerance for plot repetition and an arguably overlong runtime. Newcomers to the franchise may be able to enjoy the visual spectacle of it all, but if you haven't seen The Way of Water, expect to be very lost when it comes to story, character, and world building. If you liked Avatar: Fire and Ash, I would recommend Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. This second film in the rebooted Planet of the Apes franchise not only features some highly impressive motion capture visual effects, but is also another story about mistrust of humans, escalation leading to cyclical violent retaliation, and a leader trying to prevent war. If you liked the retreaded but slightly different storyline here, you might want to watch Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End. As another third film in a popular film franchise, this movie offers some expanded world building to introduce new factions and councils, but is overlong and a bit repetitive, hitting many familiar plot beats and doubling down on its colonialism threat. And if you want to watch something animated, you should check out How to Train Your Dragon 2. This DreamWorks animated sequel is another story about a fantastical world, and also features expanded world building and additional factions. The newly formed metaphorical bridge between humans, and in this case dragons, begins to weaken, and leads to a story of loss and grief as young characters find themselves stepping into leadership roles. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Avatar: Fire and Ash? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's a movie that you enjoy but never find yourself wanting to rewatch? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe if you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.